Good morning. Today I'm going to be reading from Romans chapter 8, starting with verse 28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of many brothers and sisters. And those he predestined, he also called. Those he called, he also justified. Those he justified, he also glorified.
Be seated. Mason, don't go anywhere yet.
Okay.
How many of y'all know Mason Lilly? You can be seated. It's okay. Man, we can get up, get down. It's all good. Mason, you're graduating this year, right?
Yes, sir.
Hendersonville High School?
Yes, sir.
Just curious. 18 years old?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What do you think you'll be doing in your 30s and 40s?
Well, I'm hoping to, be married and have a child or two. I'd like to be an accountant, working, as an accountant, doing accounting things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Football kind of going to be in the past at that point, you think?
Yes. I'm officially done with football.
Okay.
Probably for the rest of my life. So,
Enjoyed it, though?
I did enjoy it. It was one of the greatest experiences I've ever had.
So possibly 30 and 40s, couple of kids, working as an accountant, doing your thing.
Absolutely.
I love it. Man, thanks for reading today.
Thank you.
Have a seat. Y'all get that. Appreciate it, man. Good morning. If you hadn't met Mason, you need to meet Mason. I found out, was it 2 weeks ago or 1 week ago, that Mason is this extraordinary teller of stories. Like, it's really good. I like it. It's good to be with you. And you know what, Mason, actually come back up. We're going to do this again. Mason, come here real quick. Sorry. We had you sit down. Come here. I told you this was not planned, but I was going to pray over you as we did this and pray for our time together. So let's pray. Father God, thank you for today. Thank you for our time together. Thank you for seniors like Mason who are graduating this year, who are anticipating the future before them. Father, thank you for your presence in his life and for the people who are continually walking with him and helping him shape and encourage his inner world and outer world. And so, Father, as we begin to explore Joseph today and this series, may the characters that we explore continue to shape and inform, maybe and encourage our own stories in real practical ways. So, Father, we say thank you. Thank you for today. And it's in the name of your Son, Jesus, we pray. Amen. Thanks, man. Now you can sit down again. Sorry. Everybody else can stay seated again. It's okay. We'll do this again a couple of times, I'm sure, if I forget again. As 17 and 18-year-olds, most of us have dreams and expectations, right? Another graduating senior over here, and thinking about the future. It's a natural part of the process, right? For all of you at one point when you were that age. And it's natural to wonder and to anticipate and be curious about what your adult years might look like. You even have one that's been married for a full week now, right? It's astonishing. However, I would say this. I still think and I love your dream, by the way, Mason. Maybe you'll have, maybe you'll have 9 kids. I have no idea. A couple of kids, possibly married, working as an accountant. You and I, though, it's really impossible to really know what the future holds and what life will be like. Maybe in a few rare circumstances, some of you in this room had it as a second grader all written out. And you're like, this is what it's going to look like. And it has. And that's awesome. For most of us, it's probably not the case. It's a little bit different. So maybe even just like right now, just for fun of it, just kind of consider where you are in your life right now at your age. And wonder for a second. If you could have imagined yourself right now, what you're doing, who you're with, what life looks like when you were 17 years old. And on top of that, even just as challenging as it may be to think about our future, it's just as challenging to think about God's role and activity in our life, which is really hard to predict. We can't assume, right? And there are times in our life that we actually struggle to actually see God's presence alive and active in our stories in real time. And you and I have obvious glimpses, and there are moments that are very tangible. We go, there it is. But there are times in our life, I think maybe it's more than normal, that either we don't see God's work at work, God's purposes, his actions. Maybe it's because we simply can't at times. Maybe because of ourselves or other circumstances. But here's the reality. God's interactive work in our stories or lives often seems hidden or invisible. I love I don't know that I've ever sang the song that you just led us in, Blake. You think about the mysterious ways that God moves. You think maybe one way that we find this out is that usually it takes a lot of years. A lot of accumulated years and experience for you and I to realize just where God has been at work in our lives. And typically it takes place when we pause and look back. And we have opportunities to look at our past and the people who've been involved in our lives. And then you and I begin to see that he's been at work in our choices and in and through our relationships and in our circumstances. And sometimes what seemed hidden is made obvious, but only when we look back on our life. Chances are, many on our staff here at Hendersonville, Leslie's already kind of provoked this a little bit, couldn't have imagined life as they know it now when they were 17 years old. Fair, Blake? So I just thought I would show you some senior pics of the Hendersonville staff. Yeah. Just to invite you into a little bit of our stories. And I'm not going to put their names up at first. You can guess who some of them are. Some of them might be a little bit more obvious than others. But and I collected as many as I could. I couldn't get everybody's. But who do you think this fella is? Who said that's Blake? Blake Parker, the one and only Blake Parker. Blake Parker at 17, 18 years old right here. Blake, handsome fella. So much hair. I love it. I love it. Next we have this young lady. Anybody know who this is? Carolyn Braden. Yeah, I don't know if Carolyn's in here or not. This is Carolyn as she's graduating high school. Let's see who we have up here next. Anybody recognize? I mean, Molly's like, I don't look any different. It's because some of us are closer to 17 than others, right, Blake? Now, Molly's not that close to 17. Neither is somebody else here on staff. I'm just saying. I'm sorry. I'll be careful. Molly Kate Steele. Her name's up there. I promise. There it is. There you go. Molly Kate Steele. So you got that. Let's see who's next. How about this fella? This fella and this young lady right here. Les and June Chapman. There you go. I meant to put a smiley face over this person because I didn't have permission to use this picture. So sorry. If you're out there, whoever you are, my bad. Leslie, you can apologize to him later. I'm sorry. Les and June Chapman. How about this? Anybody know who this is? Yeah, this young, and I got your name right this time, Lacey. It's Lacey Potts. I always call her Lacey Walker. So I have known Lacey and Haley this long. I knew Lacey when she was a senior in high school when I moved to Hendersonville. How about this one? Yeah, he's smiling at me right now. Still looks the same. William Murphy, there you go, youth minister. Here you go. Who's this? She calls this her glamour shots. Anybody know who this is? It's Susie. Heck yeah, it's Susie O'Gwen. That's right. Susie O'Gwen's like, I don't know if I want to participate in this or not. I'm like, come on, please. You have to. You have to. Hadley, do you recognize that picture? Okay, you do. You got it. Okay. Tell Toot Toot she was up here, okay? Susie O'Gwen. How about this? The dynamic duo. Stan and Cheryl. Been dating since they were 17, right? Yeah. Longer? 16? 15? 15. And y'all been together 37 years, right? Married? 32. Okay. Stan and Cheryl. Here you go. How about this? He looks so happy to be in this picture, doesn't he? Anybody know who this is? You're like, who is that? It's got to be Tony. It's Tony Birmingham. He's like, I don't know what picture to give you. Check him out. Look at the mullet. He's had some awesome, and we can say that because he's not here today, so we can tease about his mullet. Lots of hairstyles on staff. Let me see who else. The one and only Miss Haley Parrott. Again, I've known Haley since she was about 15 years old, right? That seems about right, 15 or 16. Haley, how about this one? Anybody? Who said that? Yeah, Julia Briley. Julie's like, I don't have a picture when I was 17. And boy, she dug and dug and dug, and she found this one. She said, just make sure you put a smiley face over this, because I didn't have permission for that picture either. Okay? That's not what he really looks like, I guess. I don't know. How about this one? Big dork. I told the staff that I would only pick at my picture. If anything else was said in this auditorium this morning about them, they did it, not me. Look at the hair. There's a lot about this picture. Depending on time, I even brought my 1994 annual up here. They were like, how did you have an entire senior page? And I was like, there's 21 of us in my graduating class. There wasn't that many of us. I'm glad that you can't see all the writing on my senior page here. Also, here's what's wild when I look at this picture. I had no idea what to expect for the future, right? I thought in this picture, if you had asked me then, I thought I had it all figured out at 17, 18 years old. Even the necklace that you can barely see around my neck signifies there's a little ring on there. I was convinced that I was going to marry the girl that I was dating at the time. And if my boys were here, they'd rub some salt in the wound. They would tell you that my dad sold all his vintage Star Wars toys to buy a promise ring. To propose. Yeah, I know. And I did it. I did it, and it didn't work out that way, okay? And so I had no idea how God would be at work in my life, and really it takes looking back over 30 years. So here's what's wild, and Jennifer and I were messaging back and forth this morning. When I was 17 years old, I had no idea that there was a 21-year-old single mom somewhere in Texas that I would eventually meet and marry in 1997. And so I'm just telling you that when we think about our future, it's wild to look back and think about life as we know it. I am going to have to tell you this. There's some really great stuff up here. Micah 6:8 is up here. 1 John 5. I know you know I have to. Brian Holloway's encouraged me. There's other things. I don't know why I said this. This is from a quote from Norm from Cheers, which I never really watched growing up. And it simply says, it's a dog-eat-dog world, and I'm wearing Milk-Bone underwear. I have no idea. Like it had nothing to do with anything that I was thinking about. And just below it, just to show you how optimistic I was about life, it says, if you don't expect too much out of life, you won't get let down. Right next to this really beautiful poem by Ralph Waldo Emerson. That's me. Consider reality as you and I know it. Consider the reality that I'm living in. Consider the reality that you and your family are living in. Consider the reality that this church herself is living in. Each one of those realities, your reality, my reality, our reality, is made possible because of a lot of decisions and a lot of choices and a lot of movement and a lot of influence that happened in the past long before any of us existed. Make sense? Keep that in mind as we move forward. So as you think about that, though, consider the implications for future generations when it comes down to the decisions that you and I are still making today. Whether it's for your kids, your grandkids, or generations to come, even this church. And I think it was really no different for Joseph as you and I find him in Genesis chapter 37. Most of you have heard of Joseph. His life has inspired Broadway musicals, which we're not going to show today. It has inspired countless coloring books, as you might imagine. Practically, the story of Joseph serves as a bridge. It's pretty interesting if you think about chapters 37 through 50, in that when you meet Joseph, one of the things that this story does is it helps us move the Hebrew people from where they're living to Egypt, right? So you have a wonderful idea, and you know how they got to Egypt and how they found themselves later under the yoke of Egyptian slavery in need of liberation. So before you have Moses in the Exodus, you have to have Joseph who moves his family down into Egypt. But it's much more than a bridge. We see this idea of the hidden call of God, which is, again, why I love the song, Blake, that you chose. Here's what's interesting about chapters 37 through 50 if you're working your way through Genesis. God makes no dramatic appearances. He doesn't come in and speak one-on-one with anyone. He doesn't walk with people in the same ways. There's no divine interventions. But the narrator continues to help us recognize that the purposes of God are at work and hidden in unnoticed ways all the way through this material. And there's a couple of points I want you to think about just as we finish up through today, and that's these two things. The purposes of God are reliable. Keep that in mind. And God's ways are at work regardless of human actions and attitudes. God is still going to do what God is going to do in this world. Eventually, at the end of Genesis, you and I are going to meet Joseph, who eventually we know is a man of faith. Someone who will actually look back on his life as he's sitting with his brothers later on in the story and say, what you meant for evil, God has meant for good this entire time. But the Joseph at 17 couldn't say that. Wouldn't say that. Wouldn't have recognized that. So we meet Joseph, who's a man of faith. Later on, we meet Joseph, who's a loyal servant. We meet Joseph, who is the wise counselor. We meet Joseph, who's going to be a successful administrator and a forgiving brother. But until we get there, we're going to start with Genesis chapter 37, 1 through 4. So go ahead and turn to that in your Bibles or your smart devices, whatever you have. We're going to be in Genesis 37, 1 through 4. It's really where we're going to park it today. My job is just to introduce Joseph as we move forward through this entire series. It's going to lay the foundation. We're going to move through Genesis in some other ways here in a few minutes. But go to Genesis 37, 1 through 4. Let's read this. It says this: Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. In other words, this is the account of Jacob's family. It's his family history. Notice that we're not going to get a long genealogy like you would sometimes when you see these things. But this is the account of Jacob's family, and it begins like this. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. I would argue, or at least recommend, that these first 4 verses give us, Dalen, just about everything we need to know about Jacob and his story moving forward. The narrator points to some very heavy things, such as family dynamics and background information that's going to be really key. And so you and I already in Genesis 37, 1 through 4 are going to see tensions in the family. We're going to see hostility brewing. We're going to see actions begin to take place. And you and I are going to see this heartfelt attitude of the main characters all right here at the beginning for us to wrap our minds around. So we're going to look at Genesis 37, 1 through 4 at a glance. So just stay there in your text. I didn't put all these slides up here because it would have been a lot of slides. So just with your finger or whatever it is, we're going to move slowly through this. We know that Joseph, right off the bat, is identified. Dr. Cloud, I had to interact with you on this, as a Na'ar. One of Dr. Cloud's favorite Hebrew words. Joseph is not a boy. He's not a child. But he's a Na'ar. He's probably an assistant. He's probably an apprentice to these brothers as they are beginning to think about what it looks like to shepherd half-brothers, I might add. But he's not just a boy. He's 17, okay? And first impressions, and so Mason, this is why I kind of had some fun with you at the beginning. And any of you who are 17, 18, or younger, I don't want to make any generalized statements here. So the statements I'm about to make about Joseph don't reflect any of, especially of you who I'm looking at right here, okay? I'm sure that you're well beyond this. But when you first see Joseph, you kind of get the impression that he's maybe a little bit on the immature side. Okay? All right? A little bit self-absorbed with himself. Maybe a little bit spoiled. Maybe a little bit of a tattletale. Right? Whatever words you might want to use there. But in addition, you and I witnessed some really important family dynamics. The His family's wrestling with tension and automatically wrestling, well, not automatically, but wrestling with sibling rivalry, favoritism, and partiality from the father. So Joseph has a lot of unhealthy attention just on him. And then you and I see this object, this long-sleeved tunic that's ornamented. And it's this object of Jacob's love, and it's a token that, as we'll see next week, serves as a trigger. Every time his brothers see this robe, it insinuates and magnifies what they're feeling. So you've got crisis and you've got anger brewing, and it's anticipated all here in verses 1 through 4. You've got conflict that seems unavoidable. You've got motivation for hate and peace. The text tells us shalom is nowhere to be found in these relationships. So how did Jacob's family find itself in such a mess? You ever asked that about your own family? Anybody ever found themselves in a mess and wondered how you got there? Well, one of the things that is helpful when it comes to something like this is to actually look at Joseph's family of origin, which is what we're going to do this morning. And we're going to map it just a little bit with some modern ways of doing so. I don't know about you, but at one point in time, when I did meet Jennifer, we were in Abilene, Texas. That's where we were in school at Abilene Christian University. I had moved from Murfreesboro to there. And you students are going to find this hard to believe. But all of your phones that have GPS in it automatically didn't used to exist. Yeah. Hey, it wasn't automatic, right? You don't have to go, Siri, tell me how do I get to church? And it tells you where to go, and you just go. Siri, send me to downtown Nashville. I want to go play Topgolf. Whatever it is, okay? Or somewhere out in the sticks. We had these things. Which makes me feel really like I just dated. I feel like I dated myself in a weird way, even though I don't feel old at 48. My dad would make us become really familiar with maps, okay? And you can see you can't tell this, but there's creases in this. There really are. My dad had a collection of maps that he had in the house. And my dad made sure before we went anywhere traveling as a family, my dad always had these out with highlighted routes and like where we were going to stop and where the exits were that we would get off and all these kind of things, right? He'd say, this is where we're going to stop for lunch and this is where we're going to be in 4 hours. He could calculate all this stuff. And so using a map is actually quite helpful when it comes to exploring. By the way, you see, this should look familiar to you. You got Nashville up here, and you got Murfreesboro over there. It's a little map of Middle Tennessee. They help us engage and explore unfamiliar territory, right? And you and I can navigate unfamiliar territory by using observations and experiences, and they can be a useful companion, right? Obviously, this is not what the real territory of Middle Tennessee looks like, okay? But if it's accurate, they do provide a way to think about the territory and a way for us to navigate through it and find our way, maybe even circumvent obstacles, not like your modern GPS does, Max. It says there's a wreck up ahead or there's this and that. Maps couldn't do that, of course. But you could avoid dead ends. You could discover new routes. But maybe what happens if you have a map, the uncharted territory seems a little less daunting. Things seem a little less scary, and maybe they can be preventative and helpful in this unpredictable territory. So when I think about unpredictable territory, this is where we're going with Joseph. One of the most unpredictable and dangerous territories known to human beings are human relationships. They can be quite messy at times. And unfortunately, you and I have tools, modern tools, that we can use, especially in professional mental health, known as family systems theory, brought to us by a doctor named Dr. Murray Bowen, who designed and came up with this in the 50s. By the way, he's from Waverly, Tennessee, not too far from where we are. But it's this amazing way to think about systems. It's systems theory, it's systems thinking. It's a way to think about your home. It's a way to think about generations that you live in. It's a way to think about church and organizations. But here's what family systems thinking does. It helps us see the family unit as one emotional unit, right? Not just an individual that we're picking out. So we're not just picking at Joseph and wondering, well, what's wrong with Joseph? Why is he like that? We see the emotional unit. You and I can see the influence of all family members when we see a family as a system. We can see generational and generational relational problems passed down from generations into the families that you live in. It looks at the interconnectedness and interrelatedness of all parties included within a family. So all your children, your spouses, your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, all these different people. And it matters because every person in your family affects everybody else. All right? We also use genograms. I brought this up last year. It kind of looks like a family tree, which is why we gave kids this morning family trees. And you could begin mapping different names and that if you want to. But a genogram looks like a family tree, but it shows us so much more. And it shows us the complexity of family systems and the terrain and uncharted territory at times. And we can see how family members are interconnected, and we can see how patterns and memories are passed down from family to family. And then we can actually visualize it because a genogram becomes a graphic, pictorial display of your family. It becomes a map, a two-dimensional map, if you would. You live it, but it's a whole other thing to actually see it on a dry erase board. And so you and I can see things when we look at a genogram or our families. And here's some things that we can see. We can see family expectations and messages get passed down from generation to generation. You and I can see patterns and cycle of behavior. We can see core stories, core beliefs, core wounds, core lies developing over time. You see family themes, family secrets, rules, and all of these things are either unspoken or unspoken. A lot of times in premarital counseling, we call them landmines. Because you'll step on something and go, I didn't know that was there. I didn't know you thought about that. Yeah, our family's thought about that forever. Like, isn't that a rule in your house? You're like, no. So all of these things can be seen and expressed as you and I look at these kind of things. And you may be asking yourself, why does any of this matter, John Micah? And that's okay. Because it matters for this very reason. Because you and I are going to map Joseph's family just a little bit as we close this thing out. So go back to the book of Genesis. I'm going to ask you to come out of Genesis 37. And I'm going to go pretty quickly through this. And I didn't put slides up here for this either, but I just want you to see it as you can mark it with a pen or a highlighter or whatever you want to do. But I want you to, with me, I want us to map some of Joseph's extended family 3 generations up and down so you can get a picture of what this looks like. Go to chapter 21. In Genesis 21, you and I experience and see the birth of Isaac, the promised son. He was certainly favored over Ishmael, if you remember, right? He was the son to be. In Genesis chapter 24, we see Isaac who marries Rebekah, which is an important part of the story. And in Genesis 25, Esau and Jacob, the twins, are born, but not before you and I find them already wrestling in the womb with each other. They're not even out of the womb yet, okay? They're twins in the womb and they're wrestling. In fact, we read from the text that 2 nations are wrestling. And then in Genesis 25 and 28, you and I read very specifically that Isaac loves, favors, prefers, admires, is partial to who? Esau, right? And Rebekah is partial and loves and favors and admires Jacob. In Genesis 27, 5 through 17, at Rebekah's prompting, let me back up, Genesis 25, 29 through 34, Jacob swindles Esau's birthright. And then in 27, 5 through 17, at Rebekah's prompting, through an elaborate ruse, Jacob steals Esau's blessing. And then in Genesis 27, you find out that Esau hates Jacob and wants to kill him. More sibling rivalry. It kind of reminds you of Cain and Abel back at the very beginning. And then in Genesis 29, Jacob meets Rachel, and you find out that he loves and admires and just dotes on Rachel. And then, later in 29, we find that Laban, listen to some of these words, Laban deceives Jacob and gives him his other daughter Leah in marriage, and he ends up marrying them both. We find out in 29:30 that, again, Jacob loves or favors Rachel more than Leah. In fact, 29:31 says that she's actually unloved. The language there is pretty harsh. And the sisters become envious of each other, and they're competing for Jacob's love. And they begin to have children, and then they include their servants who have children. So at the end of the day, Leah has 4 sons. Bilhah has 2 sons. Zilpah has 2 sons. And then Leah has 2 more sons and a daughter. And then finally in Genesis 30 and 22, Rachel gives birth to Joseph. And in 35:16-20, Rachel dies giving birth to Benjamin, thus introducing the 12 tribes of Israel. Spoiler alert, they never get along, okay? And by the time you and I reach Genesis 37, the favored wife Rachel has passed away, and you and I meet Joseph, the 17-year-old, beloved son of his beloved wife, even though it doesn't say it that way. And his brothers hate him. I don't know if you can get any stronger with that word. His brothers hate him and the favoritism that he has expressed, that is expressed from Jacob. And maybe he even expresses it himself, unintentionally and intentionally at times, but that coat that he wears becomes a trigger. So consider this: years of accumulating family messages, spoken and unspoken, deception as a means of accomplishing goals and getting your way, toxic parenting and marriage-related issues, favoritism, partiality and competition, jealousy, animosity, hate, all leading to bitter sibling rivalry, is a recipe for family dysfunction and disaster. And then you and I pick up at 37, 3-4, and it says this: Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he was the son of his old age. Actually, doesn't say it explicitly, probably more because he's Rachel's son. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. This is the account of Jacob and his family. And we're just getting started. Just the first 4 verses. 3 generations of family stories and family beliefs and wounds and lies and themes and secrets. And I'll say this: it didn't happen overnight, right? One of the books that Stan and I read years ago in spiritual direction training by, I think, Susan Scott, Fierce Conversations, she bases the book off 3 premises, and she says everything in life happens gradually and then suddenly, whether good or bad. You may wake up one day and go, man, how did we get in such an amazing spot? It just seemed like it happened overnight. And you're like, no, it didn't just happen overnight. We've been working on this. Or you find yourself in a spot that's disastrous. How on earth did we get here? Well, it's probably built up over time. So this didn't happen. It happened gradually. Next week, you and I are going to witness this spiral out of control as we move into this series. But as we do so, here's 3 truths that I want to leave you with as we think about the rest of this work that we're going to be doing, but especially for today, but as we move forward as well. The purposes of God are at work in hidden and unnoticed ways. Remember that. The purposes of God are reliable. And third, God's ways are at work regardless of human attitude and action. So consider this: the world is broken and fallen, and it's a mess, and as a result, there are no perfect families that exist in this world. There have not been from the beginning of time. There never has been, and you and I will continue to experience brokenness and problems in our families, and sometimes we get stuck. But you are not alone. All right? So consider these 3 truths as you move forward. These 3 truths remain, and they should bring us hope. Right? And we may not expect it. You may not expect it, but consider this: the ways and purposes of God are at work through Jesus in hidden and unnoticed ways in your life and in your family. The purposes of God through Jesus are reliable currently in your family and in your circumstances still. And as you look back, I'm confident you will see it. And God's ways through Jesus are at work regardless of your and my attitudes and actions and how many times we mess up. God is still present and active, working good through the things that you are working through as well. So if you're here today and you're overwhelmed, maybe you think that you are finding yourself in one of those stuck moments, and maybe you're just in need of prayer. Maybe you're just in need of someone to sit with. Maybe you're in need of, maybe introducing yourself for the first time more formally to who this Jesus is, and you want to become a follower of Jesus Christ. You can do so as we stand and sing today.